Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and today we have a very interesting mech to look at. Today we're going to be talking about the Tortuga, which is a defender slash striker mech. And honestly, this is probably one of the most armored core mechs you can get in the game, and it'll make a lot more sense here in a moment. It's a very interesting one. Now, this is a size 2 mech, so it's a big boy. It's a pretty solid mech, and let's go ahead and look into its stats so we can get a general idea of what the Tortuga is about. All right, so starting out, we can already see here that this is a somewhat sturdy mech. It's got 2 armor and 8 HP. That's a pretty solid defensive spread, considering the average armor is about like 1 and 8 is the average HP. This is a slightly more sturdy mech. Now, it does have only 6 evasion, which, due to its not like higher than average HP stat, might be a problem. So I would definitely invest in some hull with the Tortuga, at least a bit, to get your HP up, especially because it gets extra use out of your additional armor anyway. Now, its E defense is actually pretty good. It's sitting at a 10, which is above average. And that's actually not the only like tech related thing that I find interesting about this mech. It also has 15 sensor range, which is really weird because there's nothing in the mech or the license that really uses these extended sensor range. And on top of that, it has a bonus of tech 1 or a tech attack of +1, which means that if you wanted to make the Tortuga a defender hacker mech, you actually really could. You would need to dive into another license to do so because, like I said, there's nothing in the license itself that actually lends itself to hacking. But the mech has and this is also an IPS North Star mech, which they don't typically have good E defense or really good hacking abilities besides the kid. So that being the case, a very strange mech. Now, it does have the high end of average for its heat capacity, and its repair capacity is also just higher than average, which is pretty good. It allows you to stay on the front lines. You can do a lot. You can use a lot of your repair kits to restore your HP if you need to stabilize, which is very solid. Its save target is average, and it is a slow mech at a speed of 3, being below average. Its system points is also slightly below the average. So overall, we have what looks like a very sturdy mech that has very good tech ability, which is interesting. Very strange, but not that it's a bad thing. If anything, it's very interesting. It's just a very weird stat spread out considering the rest of the license. But if we go down here to their traits, this is where you get some of the really cool parts of the mech. The Tortuga is a sentinel, so whenever it makes an Overwatch strike or any reactions that attack, it gets a +1 to its accuracy. So Overwatch is going to be the primary form, but I'm sure there's some other licenses that give you some attacks as part of Overwatch. I do also believe the Bonded. So Bonded was what I was thinking, but honestly, it isn't the best when you're looking into. I couldn't just on the cursory glance find any talents that also attack, but I'm sure there are some other reactions that Sentinel can work really well with. And also Guardian, one of my favorite traits, makes the Tortuga grant hardcover to its allies. So just from the traits alone and some of the stats, we know that the Tortuga wants to be on the front line. It wants to be in front of its allies, and it also wants to be close to the enemy to lock them down with its Overwatch, which is, the kind of the core aspect of the mech, kind of. Because the thing is that even though it's got some traits kind of related to that, that's not a lot, honestly. Like, having good Overwatch is solid, sure. You just need good Overwatch weapons, which there are a few, and there are some in the license. But once you do your Overwatch reaction, that's about it. And on your turn, I mean, there's not really anything that orientates you towards that other than just the desire to get up and close. But the mech is slow, so running in and engaging with enemies is somewhat difficult. So I don't know. It's a very interesting design for a mech. Now, it has 2 mounts as the main mount, and it has the heavy mount, which is a little sad. Main mount is just not a great mount in general. You know how I feel about the main mount. Heavy mount, works for a lot of different things. So this mech can use anything from an aux weapon to a heavy weapon, even a super heavy weapon, if you want to take up all your slots, which you're not going to want to do, especially considering some of the weapons in the license. But let's go ahead and get down here to the core bonus, or the core power, sorry, which is the Watchdog Co-Pilot. And as an active, you activate your Hyper Reflex mode. And for the rest of the scene, if you have a weapon that has less than a range weapon specifically that has less than range 3 for its threat, it increases to 3. So if you're unaware, all weapons, unless stated otherwise, have a minimum threat of 1. So it's assumed that all weapons have a threat of 1. So any range weapon can actually have a threat of 3 when this is active. In addition, when you activate the Hyper Reflex mode, you also get an additional Overwatch once per round. So you get essentially 2 Overwatches between your turns. Pretty solid, honestly, and it works really well with our Sentinel feature. And any character you hit with Overwatch becomes immobilized until the end of their next turn, which is incredibly good because that just means that our Sentinel now just forces enemies to stick near us. Enemies can't easily get away from us, or they can't even really get away from us unless I guess they ram or something. But even then, I don't know. This is really good to lock down enemies. My only gripe is this whole lockdown feature only really works when you're already, like using your power. That's it. So when you're not using your power, I mean, you just get 1 Overwatch and you just have Guardian. The frame itself has some interesting stats. It feels like it doesn't blend together into anything specifically. Like the Sentinel is a really good feature, but it only essentially works once per round. And the only other thing you get that, that not every mech necessarily gets is your Guardian, which is nice, but not a very active power. Its enhanced sensor range is good, and its tech attack bonus is really good, but nothing in the license leans towards this. So the Tortuga is very interesting, and this is kind of a, I don't know. We're going to look through the rest of the license, but it's kind of a cannibal license. And what I mean by that is you're going to be taking a lot of parts out of this license for the use of other mech frames that actually have more specialties. Or you might have to take parts from other mech frames to make this frame work particularly well. But like I said, let's go ahead and take a look at the rest of the license to see how it all fits together. So starting right off out the gate, we have a weapon, which I love weapons in the first ranks of a license. And this is probably one of the coolest weapons in the game if you love shotguns. This is the Deck Sweeper automatic shotgun. Now, it's a crazy weapon. It only has a range of 3, but it also has threat 3 innately. So works perfectly on the Tortuga. And it does 2d6 damage as just a main size weapon. That's insane. Now, this does come at a bit of a penalty. It is inaccurate, so it is a +1 difficulty. But if you're using the Tortuga, you actually get an accuracy if you're using it for Overwatch. So when you're Overwatching with the Deck Sweeper, you actually just don't have any penalty, and you have a admittedly short range, but insanely powerful main weapon. The 2d6 is really good, and this is a very cool weapon. I really, really like this one, and it fits the Tortuga, and it's kind of what the Tortuga is designed for, even though its Hyper Reflex mode would have given it a 3 threat anyway, so even a part of its core power doesn't necessarily affect this shotgun, which is designed for it, which is interesting. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and again, I love the Hyper Reflex mode, because it can turn any weapon, any range weapon, into a 3 threat range, which is insanely good. The problem is that you're going to be using probably this shotgun anyway, because it's so powerful and it blends really well with your kit. So it's just, I don't know. It's just a part that I'm not a particularly big fan of, but I do absolutely love the Deck Sweeper automatic shotgun. Next up is the Siege Ram. It's a 2-point system, and whenever you ram, you deal 2 kinetic damage or 10 AP kinetic damage to an object or terrain. This allows the Tortuga to get where it needs to go. It can push enemies, it can bust through obstacles. Really good, probably potentially even better on the Caliban, which is a frame we'll get to later. But the Caliban is the major like ramming style of frame. So this is one you would take for like another license, which is kind of why I mentioned it's kind of a cannibalized license in a lot of ways. The C-Dram is good. The Tortuga doesn't have a lot of system points, but I can definitely see picking this up, and it benefits your closer range preference. You're going to want to, get up in close with your enemies and pushing them around, bullying them, especially at a size 2 mech frame, is not a bad choice whatsoever. And it pretty much adds damage to an action you may have already taken anyway. So there's honestly no reason not to use the C-Dram, at least at the point in the license where you would pick up the frame. Speaking on picking up the frame, at rank 2, when we get to the Tortuga frame, we also get the Daisy Cutter, a heavy close quarters combat weapon that is insane. It's a 7-cone shotgun, pretty much, that does 3d6 kinetic damage. 3d6 actually does put it at the higher potential range, but maybe not the higher average damage range of heavy weapons in the game. And this one does come with a special feature. When you shoot the weapon, it creates a cloud of smoke in the attack cone, providing soft cover in the affected area that lasts until the end of your next turn. This is also a limited 2 weapon. Now, the thing about this I don't like is I don't understand what the purpose of the additional feature is. So it's a huge cone shotgun. That means if you're fighting in like close quarters, if you're fighting in hallways, which is actually what the Tortuga is designed to do, it's supposed to get onto enemy ships and clear out enemy ships. That's its design. The Daisy Cutter makes sense with the damage, but the problem becomes you then, in the area of the attack cone, create a cloud, so any enemies that survive now have soft cover. I guess you also technically would benefit from the soft cover from them, but still, it's it's only soft cover in the area is being provided. So this only benefits your enemies, the ones that survive anyway. So, I mean, I can see the benefit being you blast off your Daisy Cutter and you walk into the smoke. I can kind of see that being the general like gist. But if there's any enemies in your massive 7-cone, then they're going to benefit from it as well. It's also a limited system, which makes sense. The weapon, again, does have really high damage potential. I mean, a really good roll from a Daisy Cutter can absolutely just instant structure out another mech frame. And for a lot of enemies in the game, that's enough to just kill the frame outright, because most enemies only have like one structure. So that being the case, it's a very powerful weapon. Limited makes sense. The big cloud, maybe it was intentionally put in to further nerf the weapon, but it can be used to your advantage. I don't know. I like the Daisy Cutter. I think it's really good. And because it's limited to, it's something where if you invest in your engineering, you can get more of it. And engineering is not necessarily a bad pick. I don't know if I would pick it necessarily for the Tortuga, because the Tortuga has such a good tech related abilities that I would probably invest in hull and systems, maybe even agility to get the Tortuga into position more easily before I would start investing in engineering. But there's probably a ton of different ways you could build the Tortuga, so it can work all together. I like the Daisy Cutter. It's just a little confusing for me in the license, especially. Also, here at rank 2, we get the Catalytic Hammer, aka the Pile Bunker. You can see here in the compendium text here. This is an insane main melee weapon because it does plus 5 damage. This weapon's minimum damage is essentially the average damage of a 2d6 weapon. And 2d6 is pretty good. but this can easily get more than the average for a 2d6 weapon, having a very insanely high average damage. Now, on critical, it also has an additional effect where the enemy needs to make a hull save or become stunned until the end of their next turn. That's also insane. Now, this is all capped at being a loading weapon. So you need to reload the weapon however you can, usually by stabilizing to use it again. And I think that's okay. And this is kind of why I said this is kind of like an Armor Core weapon. Because if you played Armor Core 6, you know one of the, like, at least when the game first came out, one of the best weapon combinations was double shotgun and pile bunker. And while you couldn't necessarily do double shotgun this time around, you can definitely do shotgun pile bunker, even with a barrage, which is pretty cool. Now you have to be in close range, but there's a way to counteract the range weapon inaccuracy at close range, even though the deck sweeper is also a inaccurate weapon. But there are some workarounds for it. In any regard, an insanely powerful weapon combination, an insanely powerful, like if you combine this with the deck sweeper in a full barrage, just right up on an enemy, your damage potential is insane. Inaccurate, and probably then you have to worry about loading your catalytic hammer, but it's very powerful and it's a really good 1-2 punch for getting rid of an enemy like ASAP. I absolutely love the catalytic hammer. I think it works really well with the Tortuga. I don't really have as many complaints about this one. I think the loading is fine. The insane like high bonus, the +5, just makes this weapon much more like willing to use it, because at minimum you're getting 6 damage out of it kinetic. Like even with armor, the enemy is going to feel it. It's really good. And if you do manage to get a crit, it's really, really good. So honestly, this is insanely good for the Tortuga. All right, at rank 3, we get a very fun weapon mod. Now, this weapon mod can only be used with CQBs, cannons, and rifles. Now, I love the rifle aspect, but it is not good for super long range weapons. Cannon is hilarious, and the CQB just makes a ton of sense. So the close quarters combat weapons, obviously. Now, and this can work for any size from auxiliary to super heavy. Really good. But what does the through bolt round do? I'm going to have to hide my camera here because unfortunately it's just hiding. Well, I can actually do... There you go. So, what's it do? So, essentially, you load up your next shot, into a special through bolt round, and then you draw a line 3 path from you, passing through terrain or other obstacles. Any characters or objects in this path take 2 armor piercing damage as the through bolt just punches right through them. And range, cover, and line of sight for the attack are then measured from the end of this path, continuing in the same direction. So what that means is you load your next round into this through bolt, you draw a line, and then at the end of this line, or whatever, at any point in the line, you can end essentially the punch power, and then your shot continues through it. So if you have a shotgun, what this is really supposed to do is you run up to cover. The enemy is hiding behind like some kind of bunker, some kind of barricade, right? You put your gun up against the barricade, you launch your shot through the barricade, and your shotgun blast will appear on the other side. With the daisy cutter, this is especially dirty because you can, again, just point your gun at a wall, and as long as it's not more than 3 hexes, which is pretty massive, you can shoot your daisy cutter through it, and then the explosion, the 7 cone, appears on the outside. That's nuts. And there's no cost to using this. It's just, obviously it's a unique one, so you can't use it on multiple different weapons, which is a little sad, but honestly not a super big deal. It's also only 2 system points. And if you're absolutely like gonna be big brain about it, if there's an enemy that is super heavily armored and you're not using a weapon that's very high punch, which for the categories doesn't make a lot of sense, but you could just use this as a way of hurting the enemy instead, because it's 2 armor piercing kinetic damage and it hits every character and object in that range. Now, it's really solid. I really, really like the 3-bolt rounds. I think this works really well with the Tortuga. It also amplifies its ability to fight in corridors, as it can punch through and shoot enemies through, not around corners, through corners. By and this, like, walls are no longer a problem. The 3-bolt is insanely powerful. Now, the reason why it doesn't necessarily work with a rifle as well is, unfortunately, if you're, I mean, if you're like in a protected bunker way away, then maybe it works. But the whole point is that it's for shooting a wall that you're essentially adjacent to or close to. So that being the case with the rifle, I mean, again, you can have the fun thing of you build a wall around your range unit and they shoot. And the best part is the cover is from the end of the through bolt. So you're not actually suffering the cover difficulty as long as there's no cover further between you and the enemy, which is insanely good. So I really like through bolt rounds. I think it works really well with the Tortuga. And for 2 system points, this is a must get if you're getting this far into the Tortuga anyway. Like, if you're going 2 ranks in, you might as well get the 3rd rank and get the through bolt, because it's just a very powerful mod. All right, and the final capstone for the Tortuga here is the Hyperdense armor. Now, the Hyperdense armor is very interesting. Now, it's a 3-point system, so pretty expensive, and it is an infighting shield. So this is a shield. So if you have any frames that use shields really well, which the Napoleon has some features around, though I don't think this one is particularly good for the Napoleon, then that's something to consider. But this is a shield that you have to use a quick action to both activate and deactivate. So that's very important. A lot of shields can be deactivated like as a protocol. This one needs to be used as a quick action. Now, this is for infighting. What infighting is, if you're unfamiliar, is fighting up at close range. Infighting is when you get into your enemy's essentially like immediate bubble to fight them. So when you activate the Hyperdense armor, you cover yourself in this shimmering shield, and you gain resistance to all damage, heat, and burn from attacks that originate beyond range 3. Now, it does say attacks specifically, so that does not mean necessarily any hacks or invades. Now, maybe that is a tech attack. I don't know, actually. That's interesting. Are those attacks? Is an invade an attack? I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below. Regardless, it does specify attack, so that may or may not change how something works. I'm not sure. But the biggest thing is for any attacks that originate from beyond range 3. And while this is active, you become slowed and deal half damage and heat and burn to characters beyond range 3. So this means that if an enemy is within range 3 of you, they're not having their damage reduced by your resistance, and you are also not dealing half damage to them because they're within that range 3. This creates a zone essentially around your mech where you can fight an enemy mano a mano without having too much interruption outside of that range. Now, the one thing I dislike is it slows you, and your mech is already a really slow mech, so this makes it hard to utilize very well, because an enemy on their turn could theoretically shoot you and then move out of your range and potentially farther than you could go, benefiting from your hyperdense and punishing you for it. Now, the benefit is, if you're using the deck sweeper shotgun, in order to do this maneuver, the enemy does trigger your Overwatch more often than not. But this is just a particular defense that feels like it has the potential to be outplayed. And when you deactivate it, it has to be a quick action. And when you deactivate it, you're no longer slowed, and all the other benefits go away. So I think this works just for really the Tortuga. It might also work really well for like a Blackbeard or something. Any mechs that really want to get into close range combat, I think this works very well. And this also has an additional benefit of just being a really solid like anti-range defense. Because if you're going up against like artillery mechs or something, this is pretty much a guaranteed way to get resistance to all their damage until you get into close range, in which case you're already kind of playing against their major strength. So I do think the hyperdense armor is very interesting and very fun. I feel like it can be a little bit of a trap in some situations, though, where if you're dealing with a particularly speedy enemy, and I mean, there are also some enemies that can get away from Overwatch or prevent themselves from provoking reactions. So the hyperdense armor can be a liability in those situations because it slows you down. So take this one at your own peril. I will say, though, hyperdense armor is an insanely good anti-artillery method of fighting in the game, and it protects you when you're infighting with someone from any kind of like outside influence, as you're already a pretty tanky mech, so the resistance is already going to be piled on top of how much you're reducing from armor anyway. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video. The Tortuga, which is so thick that it blocks its own name here on CompCon, is a very interesting mech. I think it has a really good base frame for a lot of different styles of play, and there's no penalty really to it. Like that's kind of where a lot of my thought kind of boils down to. Is the Tortuga isn't really built to do anything super specific besides overwatching. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. Now, its core power definitely is built for overwatching, but if you take the core power out of consideration, I mean, you have a very solidly sturdy mech that has really good tech potential and is a guardian mech as well. So it can block its allies in a lot of situations by providing hard cover. The best ways to build Tortuga, I think, is to invest in a lot of hull and agility. Maybe some systems if you want to go the tech route. The Tortuga could be a really good bodyguard mech. I think that's where the Tortuga really would shine as a solid bodyguard mech. Invest in a lot of agility so it can keep up with whoever it's defending, and it gets up close. Any enemies that want to get away from it, it can lock down if it uses its core power, and it's really good for guarding specific like targets. The weapons on it are insanely good, and honestly, the Tortuga just has a lot of really good pickups for any mech outside of it. Like all of these parts here can work on a lot of different frames, honestly. The Deck Sweeper is even really not that bad of a weapon, even with its inaccuracy, because that can actually be canceled. So, I think the Tortuga, actually, and that's actually another thing, the Tortuga can use lock on really well. It can set up lock on for its allies at a pretty far distance. So yeah, the Tortuga has a lot of different build routes. I think it's very interesting. It's a very neutral mech, and it can be built in a lot of ways. Legitimately, I think Tortuga is a really good second license pickup for your game. It's a good second license because you can use it to add parts to like another mech that you're building, like your primary mech, your first license mech. But then you can also take parts from your first mech and add it to the Tortuga, or you can build whatever your third rank mech can be something that can build the Tortuga in multiple different ways. So I feel like the Tortuga is just a very solid, like, second license pickup that you can then use to add to future licenses or to combine with future licenses to give the Tortuga a varied style of play. And because of this, it makes it a very good flex frame for different mission types that your primary frames might not be good at. But that's going to be it for me. If you enjoyed, please leave a like. It increases the chance that other people get to see this video. And subscribe as I talk about all things tabletop here, including games like Pathfinder, Warhammer 40k, all that kind of stuff. And if you want to see more Lancer content, well, then this is the place to be. But thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. and I'll see you all next time. Bye.